It was just this year, right, when we heard about the Andre Dawson stuff to a greater degree that he wanted to have his cap changed. What he was talking about, because remember when they
I
made
think he
him
was petitioning to change it
this year, right?
Right,
Yeah.
but I think he's talked about it previously that he went in as a Expo and he would much prefer to be a Cub.
Right, and that had to do with the fact that he didn't like the way the Expos were taking care of him. And then when we talked about him going to the Cubs and letting them write his salary in for the 1 year. And so he feels he was wronged by the Expos, even though Major League Baseball does consult with the player when the player goes into the Hall of Fame since 2001. And they said no.
No. Like, nah, you did more stuff with the... Now, I kind of understand Major League Baseball's perspective, just because you wouldn't want some kind of weird thing where, like, a team could literally mercenary out a cap by giving a guy a fat contract at the end of his career with the stipulation that he goes in under their team for whatever reason. But I think that you're just not going to... Players don't act like that. So it seems like it's a very arbitrary thing to be like, for Major League Baseball to be so guarding of it. Like, I don't think players would just be like, oh, yeah, you gave me a big contract, random team I played 1 year for. Yeah, I'll go in the Hall of Fame under you. Usually it's a bit more meaningful.
I think it went when Wade Boggs was going to the Hall of Fame, there was an allegation that he received monetary compensation to wear the Tampa Bay Devil Rays logo. By the way, the only team that does not have a player with a cap in the Hall of Fame, Tampa. And, basically he had signed with them as an expansion team, and obviously there's a Red Sox and a Yankee when he was either of those. And he was depicted as a member of the Boston Red Sox. The Hall of Fame said, nah, baseball said you can't do that. And so they felt he was being compensated. So to your point,
right,
they're saying, okay, so if you're going to be paid off,
that's
if you
one.
will,
That's like that's one.
We don't
thing.
want that.
We don't want that, and especially in a situation, because very rarely is it as egregious a situation like that where like Wade Boggs paid what, maybe 2 years for the Devil Rays,
something like that,
because it was for the Devil Rays,
something like that,
right? He didn't put any of his legacy in there, so it doesn't make sense for him to go. But Andre Dawson put up plenty of good years for the Cubs, so it wasn't like he was a persona non grata for them.
But no, they loved him in Chicago,
right,
but he played a lot longer, and I still would say that while he had good years in Chicago, he had greater contribution to his career.
While
in
he
Montreal.
was an Expo, correct.
Yeah. So Frank Robinson is another guy that I think about who famously was traded after winning the MVP or traded from the Orioles to the National League to Cincinnati, where he won the MVP, I should say, in 1966. I think. And so he had to make a tough choice because he won MVPs for both teams, one in each league, the only guy ever to do that. And he decided to go in as an Oriole. And when you think about it, the Reds didn't win the World Series when he was there. They went to the World Series 1 year when he was there, but the Orioles obviously won a few times with him being a major member of the team. And that feels right to me. Like, it feels like Frank Robinson, even though he did well for both teams, that decision, and that was before they stopped allowing guys to, the league really didn't want to hear what you had to say.
So when did they first start adding black caps and uniforms to the Hall of Fame? Because I know that the guys that played originally, like back in the dead ball era, they're in there without any of that. That was something that Major League Baseball added in like after the fact, right?
Yeah, well, obviously, like we talk about all the time, there are a bunch of players who just didn't have any cap at all. Had no logo on the caps, so you can't really, do that. And there were guys like, old guys, right?
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Like, Yogi Berra doesn't have a cap in his Hall of Fame picture, but that's for a funny reason.
Yeah, so...
Whereas there's a lot of guys from, like, the earliest, what we jokingly refer to as funny baseball, but even the dead ball era of baseball that aren't in there because baseball just didn't do that back then. And I think there's a difference between those two things.
I do too. And in Yogi's case, it was, I've been looking this up because there really was no answer as to why Yogi doesn't have a cap. And obviously he played almost entire career with the Yankees and is a Yankee through and through, the quintessential Yankee. So I was going back and forth with Kellyanne Troop, and she said, maybe we should ask Lindsey Berra, his granddaughter. So she included her in this tweet, whatever it is. And sure enough, Lindsey Berra responded, which was great.
Yeah.
And she says, folks like to make a big deal of this. But as I understand it, Grammy Carmen thought Grandpa's ears looked too big in the front view plaque. So the artist did a profile instead. And when you do a profile, you can't see the logo on the cap. That's it.
So it wasn't a kind of grand conspiracy. Yogi just...
It's not a slight against the Yankees. I don't want them, I'm too good for that. So that's just such a Yogi
thing. But
thing.
I think it's interesting because now that you have the element of the cap decision, it's something that players actually have to think about. As before, when you originally were going in, you just went in. You went in as the player. The team you were playing for didn't matter as much.
We had Jeff Idelson, the past Hall of Fame president, on our podcast when we did our book discussion with them on with Gene Fruth, the photographer, and so Jeff was said to have said that picking a logo for a player is not that difficult since there's usually a clear delineation of where a guy made his most indelible mark. But despite the practice, the Hall of Fame believes that players should be identified by the dominant team. Now, it doesn't always work that way because I think Carlton Fisk went in as a Red Sox, and he played 13 years for the Chicago White Sox and 11 years for the Red Sox.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean dominant team. Because dominant team, I think
or his dominant performance.
Right, I think when they were using dominant team, they're more referring to what would be the period that if you conjured up an image of that player in your mind, what cap is he wearing? To me, that's how
he's waving the ball. Fair, right?
Right. And so it's like, here's a guy that could be going in this year, Gary Sheffield, who would be a very interesting guy because he could go in for a lot of teams. He played for a ton of people.
I think he's the kind of guy. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll go over the entire ballot and just kind of see who we think it might be. But I think you're right. I think a lot of the guys, Sheffield played for a bunch of teams, like 9
go in
teams
as a Brewer.
I don't know if he'll go in as any teams.
Right, he'll probably go in.
I don't know.
And I think
he probably won't go in actually.
Right, but I think that's an equally valid thing. If you were a guy that played your whole career for a bunch of different teams, like if Greinke went in and said, "No, I don't want a cap," it would feel both on brand for him and appropriate because he was the mercenary arm of this generation.
So I've been hearing things that Greinke, we think he'll go in as a Hall of Famer, and he bookended his career by starting, I think, in Kansas City and ending in Kansas City. But he had his worst performances of his entire career with Kansas City, even though he played there more years than any place else. And so, would you go in as a Royal when you had the success with the Dodgers and the Astros and the other team? I see Zach Greinke not wearing a cap at all.
Right, I can see that.
Wearing a tennis hat or something like that.
Or a royal hat because he's Zach Greinke and he kind of just does what he wants.
Another guy who I like to talk about who doesn't have a logo is Charlie Gehringer, the Tigers' second baseman, and he played all 19 years for the Tigers. Okay, so there's no other teams, and by that time they had cap logos. He didn't even attend the induction ceremony because he was getting married 5 days later.
So, did Maddox ever provide a reason why he didn't want a logo on his cap?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was that he was a significant contributor in Chicago and for the Braves.
Won all his Cy
yeah,
Youngs
I know.
So just for people who are aware, Greg Maddox doesn't have a logo on his cap. He actually specifically requested not to, and that was approved by Major League Baseball. But that's got to kind of sting if you're Atlanta, I feel like.
Well, the Hall honored his request, and sometimes it's I don't want to piss off the city, that I played in because I like Chicago. Greg Maddox would say I had a good career there when I played.
Was Chicago really going to begrudge him if he went in as a Brave? Well, I guess, but then maybe that's because I only ever knew him as a Brave. That it's weird to think of him as anything else. Yeah, I don't even really think of his career with the Cubs as being anything significant, and maybe that's my fault.
Yeah, he was the the guy that basically gave the reason that I said like I don't want to kind of lay one way or the other. So I think that's most of the time when guys don't pick a hat, they're basically saying, well, I'm better off being on the fence, or I had a career that was so even I can't decide, like you said about Sheffield. So there are lots of guys and lots of Hall of Famers that are in there with no cap, and most of them are from way back. Right. And even if they were elected in later years, like Three-Fingered Brown, who we talked about not long ago, but he wasn't elected until 1949, but there were no caps when he was pitching back in the early 1900s.
Right. If we went through the list of players that don't have caps in the Hall of Fame, the vast majority of them are names people nobody will recognize.
I looked up and saw that Cy Young went into the Hall of Fame with a cap, which is pretty remarkable because I don't even know if they had logos back when he was pitching. He started pitching for the Cleveland Spiders in the 80s and 90s, and he wore the cap of the Spiders. He had the Spider cap in the Hall of Fame, even though he pitched most of his years for the Red Sox and had great success, and he did have some success.
But he wanted to go in
Cleveland
as a Spider,
which is just interesting only because I don't even know if they had logos on the caps when he was playing for the Spiders.
Like a little spider on that'd be cool.
I can't tell you. And if you look at other guys on there are. I'm just looking at if there's anybody who's recent, and there really isn't.
Well, Messina went in without one.
Right. Well, but that's different. I'm talking about from old time. Yes, Messina is famously one who doesn't do it. Tony La Russa doesn't have a cap.
That was interesting, actually, because I would have thought but I guess he had such success with both the Athletics and the Cardinals. Right. I can see he's kind of the guy.
Not the White Sox?
Not the White Sox.
Roy Halladay famously did not have a logo on his cap.
Right, because I think you could say
Significant for two teams.
Significant for two teams, and he had his biggest postseason success with one of them, but he had a lot more years with the other one. So that's a tough situation for him.
And I mistakenly thought that Roland didn't wear a cap, and I got confused because he did, and he wore the cap of the Cardinals, and I think he played one more year for the Phillies, but like he was very disenchanted when he left Philadelphia, and so he kind of burned that bridge and said, "I'm going to go as." So they probably don't like him too much there anymore.
Teams is that they piss off a player, he goes somewhere else, and even though he was great for them for a large number of years, he wants nothing to do with them after his career. And then you get guys like Keith, where I think if Keith went in, it'd be a very interesting discussion if he'd go in as a Cardinal or a Met.
That's a good question. His teammate Gary Carter, wanted to go in as a Met, and I think he played 5 years for the Mets, and I'm going to say many more for Montreal, 8 or 9 at least. And the Hall allowed him to go in as a Met. Which is that right?
No, I think he's in as an Expo.
You're right. The Hall decided that his impact on he wanted to go in as a Met, and they're like, no.
You're going.
And that was before they changed it in 2001, allowed the player to have more of a say, but it sounds like they didn't care anyway because he was trying to have a say. So I think that Carter, it's interesting only in that he played longer and was a better player for Montreal. And as a Met fan, I love having him, would have loved to having him as a Met, but it feels like that's the right decision that he went as a Montreal Expo.
And that's most of them. Major League Baseball doesn't ever feel like they're making the wrong decision on these. It's kind of like, yeah, that makes sense.
I think Piazza's the same way, don't you? Like, Piazza had more longer success with the Dodgers than he did with the Mets. He did.
Yeah.
He did. He didn't hit 362 for the Mets.
No.
He had some crazy seasons when he was a young player with the Dodgers, and I'm sure he played more seasons for the Dodgers than he did for the Mets. 100% sure of that. I don't know what the difference is. But he wanted to go in as a Met, and they said, okay. So
I think it probably depends on how close it is, because I actually think you're wrong on that. Let me look this up, because I don't think Piazza's that far off in his years between being a Met and a Dodger. So give me 1 second.
Okay. And when he went into the Hall of Fame,
he played more seasons for the Mets.
No.
Yeah.
Tell me.
8 seasons for the Mets, 7 for the Dodgers.
I didn't think he played 8 seasons for the Mets.
He played 8 seasons, so that makes sense.
Just give me a couple of those seasons there, because it seems like he had like 5 really good seasons.
He played for the Mets from 1998 through 2005.
Wow. Okay.
His best years for the Mets.
Did he have any bad years at the end there? Maybe that's what I'm forgetting, that he was ineffective at a certain point.
Well, he missed most of the 2003 season.
Well, that happens.
But he was pretty shot by that point. But the thing is, he had the 99, 2000, 2001, and 2002 season. Specifically, his 2000 season, where he hit 324 with 38 homers and 113 RBIs.
It was an off year.
It's probably his best year as a Met.
That's crazy. So let's go through by teams, and we there'll be some teams we can't talk about every player because the freaking Yankees have 22 Hall of Famers.
Right.
The Dodgers and the Giants have 15. I counted, and it would make sense that the oldest teams would have the most Hall of Famers, and the Yankees with 27 World Championships. You think that's going to happen?
Have a lot.
So we mentioned the Rays only don't have any.
Yep.
The Angels have 1.
Vlad Guerrero.
Very good. The Astros have 2.
Bagwell and Biggio, but I mean, you can look at that team right now and think Altuve is going to be joining them someday, and potentially Verlander as well, because he could go in as an Astro. Though I think he'll go in as a Tiger.
I think as a Tiger too. I was just looking that up today because we're doing a deep dive in the Tigers next,
right.
And I was surprised at how long he pitched for the Tigers and how well.
Right.
Maybe not how well, just how long. The A's
have less than you think.
Right, because they are an original American League team. They've got 5 Hall of Famers, including manager Dick Williams, Eckersley Fingers, Raleigh Fingers, Ricky Henderson, and Al Simmons, who's one of those players that you probably don't know much about. Ridiculously good player, but he played 75 years ago.
He played in the
almost.
50s.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not going to know that. So I agree. You think, and as they said in this article, you would think the A's should have more players.
You just feel like they should, but then I feel like they've had a lot of Hall of Famers that have played for them that just didn't go in as A's.
I think if somebody would ask me how many Hall of Famers do the Blue Jays have, I don't know if I'd have got this right. There's 1.
Alomar?
It is Alomar, yeah. And I guess I think of him as an Oriole, but...
Nah, but he had his most success with the Blue Jays. And Who else would be in there for the Blue Jays if it's not Halladay?
Well, Fred McGriff didn't wear
and
a
Halladay
logo
didn't wear
so the guys that were there and the other guys like Joe Carter, they are almost guys, as we talked about. They're pitching Vlad Guerrero Jr. as a possible. Yeah, no, he's got to turn his career around. The Braves. We
just talked about them the other day on our deep dive. So we've been through that list. It's a pretty expansive list.
Right. And with Andrew Jones knocking on the door, and you think that might happen. So they have 10 or 11 Hall of Famers, and we talked about that in a prior podcast.
13.
13. Okay. The Brewers have 2.
Yep. Paul Molitor and Robin Yount.
Yeah. Deservedly,
right,
unquestionably
100% Hall of Famers. But I'm just surprised it's only the 2 of them. But they're also an expansion team, so it's not as surprising.
Right, they were the team that moved. They were the Seattle Pilots, and there are no Seattle Pilots in the Hall of Fame. Or Milwaukee. The Cardinals, as you'd expect, have a bunch.
Yeah.
And Albert Pujols is probably the guy who's next going to go in. I guess I didn't realize that Ted Simmons, when he went in a couple of years ago, went in as a Cardinal, and
that was a big deal.
Because he played for the Brewers for a long time as well, and boy, they sure could use another Hall of Famer, considering the Cardinals have like 12 or 13 Hall of Famers, including Bruce Sutter. The Cubs also have about the same amount as the Cardinals, and I don't know if the Cubs have any Hall of Famers. So figuring Sammy Sosa is not.
If Sammy Sosa's not going in, I can't think of anybody. Maybe Chris Bryant when he first came up was, but not anymore. I can't think of anybody from that team.
I saw John Lester's name pop up. Going no.
And if he would go in, I don't know if he would go in
as a Red Sox or
he might go in capless.
The Diamondbacks have 1. It was only interesting because I had trouble thinking who would it be.
And it makes
sense.
It's not
Schilling.
It's Randy Johnson.
Right.
It makes sense that Johnson would go in for them because he got a Cy Young's and the World Series title there. And he had his perfect game there.
The guy that they don't mention for the Diamondbacks that I thought had a chance, and we've looked at his career a few times with a career WAR of something like 57, is Luis Gonzalez. Just had a way better major league career. Doesn't make him a Hall of Famer, but he's probably about the closest guy.
Right. And I think 57 sounds high for him.
No, I think if you look him up, you will see that because that's stuck in my mind. Like really, Luis Gonzalez had a 57 career WAR, and I'm pretty sure I was wrong before, so I could be having one of those days. So, yeah.
51.
Oh, 51. Okay. I am having one of those days.
That's pretty close, though.
That's still pretty high.
Yeah.
Over 50 is pretty good. The Dodgers, we mentioned, have 15. And Mike Piazza could have made it 16, but his star burned brighter in Queens, I guess, is what we discussed. Gil Hodges just went in recently as a Dodger.
Right, and Kershaw will be joining them.
I don't think if Manny Ramirez was ever to go in,
he'd go in as a Red Sox.
I think so, too.
If you didn't go as a Red Sox, you'd certainly go in as an Indian. Or Guardian. I don't think you would go in as a Dodger. He only played a couple, maybe 2-3 seasons there.
And Gary Sheffield had some nice years for the Dodgers, but I'm convinced if he does get in, I can't see a logo on his cap because he just played too many places. We talked about the Expos. Dawson Carter and Tim Raines is the other guy in from there. The Giants have another 15. They go all the way back to High Pockets Kelly and stuff like that.
That's what you get for being an original franchise. You got a bunch of guys on there. I feel like the Giants have one of the more recognizable overall list of names, actually.
Well, when you put Willie Mays, McCovey, and Christy Mathewson in there.
Hoyt Wilhelm are a known guy in baseball circles.
I tell you, I would have not picked Hoyt Wilhelm as a Giant in my mind. I think he's a White Sox guy.
So but baseball fans know what kind of player he was, so that's a recognizable name if you're a baseball nerd.
So and the omission there is that Mel Ott, who played in the teens and 20s with the big leg kick and whatnot, and hit the 511 home runs, didn't have a cap and went in without a cap. But he should be a Giant because that's who he played for.
And interestingly, the next team we're going to talk about, the Guardians, they have sort of the inverse problem, or the opposite of what the Giants have, where they have a bunch of guys that nobody's heard of for the most part, it feels like.
Well, just back to the Giants for a second. So Barry Bonds, who we both hope will get in the Hall of Fame one day, does he go in as a Giant over a Pirate?
Yeah.
Okay, I think so too. And how about Jeff Kent? Giant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so as well. And Jeff Kent played for
The Mets.
Toronto, the Mets,
But
the
he had
Dodgers, and
his years
the Giants.
for the
yes,
Giants.
I agree with that. Yeah, and the Guardians, Indians, and guys. I don't know if you know these guys, right? Earl Averill. You know, yeah, I know how
I've
good a
heard
player he was.
Lou Boudreau. 'Cause
Lou
you've said
Boudreau,
his
I've talked
name a
about.
bunch.
Kovalevsky was a pitcher. Stan Kovalevsky,
Yeah.
Larry Doby, we've talked about. The first African
I mean, I've heard
American
of Bob
player.
Feller, obviously, and Napoli Joy.
So
But
Addie Joss is a great story, which we should do. Can he do a whole podcast? So this guy got, I think, tuberculosis and died 9 years into his career pitching for the Indians. He has, if you look at his career, he has one of the most ridiculous major league careers in the 9 years, like dominant, pitcher. And they overwrote the rules because of what happened to him and let him go in the Hall of Fame, even though he only played 9 years.
because that's how much respect he had. Wow.
Yeah. Nap Lajwe, Bob Lemon, Al Lopez, Joe Sewell, one of my favorite players to talk about because he came up when the poor guy was killed and he became a Hall of Famer. Tris Speaker, Jim Thome, and rightly so for Cleveland.
Tome's their most recent one, and probably will stay that way until maybe Jose Ramirez.
I think that's a good call. I think he's got a. I don't think anybody else from there. Early Win is the other guy. Manny Ramirez. I hope he gets in. I have no idea which team Manny would go because Manny would be Manny, and
Right, he'll go wherever he wants.
Done something you don't expect. The Mariners have Griffey and Edgar Martinez, and Ichiro obviously
Is a
will
first ballot Hall of Famer the moment he's up.
The Marlins. Well,
They don't have one either.
I guess they don't have one. That's right. That's right. So there's more than one team, obviously the Rays and the Marlins, and you would think the more recent teams, if they're going to
Makes sense.
So would Miguel Cabrera go in? No, he's going as a Tiger.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Gary Sheffield as a Marlin.
He had some great years with the Marlins, but that's the thing. It's like he was. You remember when Gary
You're
Sheffield?
reaching.
He played for the Mets. I think in the last year of his career, near the end of his career, and he batted cleanup at like age 44 or something like that. That's how good a hitter this guy was.
Yeah.
You put him in the cleanup spot. Well, he kind of had to go up. I played in a wheelchair, but the guy can still hit.
He can still hit.
So, and the Mets, I guess we got a guy on the ballot this year, David Wright.
Right, hoping to join Piazza and Seaver.
Hoping to get to year 2 on the ballot, I think is what he's
Wright
trying to
was
do.
on a Hall of Fame track before he got hurt, and Beltran could go in as a Met,
I feel like he will.
but he's got his whole mess with the cheating scandal, so I just don't know what that's going to do.
What it's going to do is what it's done so far, but
Right.
I'm hoping that will happen for him. The Nationals, obviously, are the Montreal Expos. The only guy there who has a sniff, Max Scherzer is probably not going to go in as a Nat.
If he does, if he might, and he would be the best guy that has a chance, because I do not think Harper will go in as a National.
No, not after.
Not after that.
No. I agree with that. The Orioles have 6 and great names: Eddie Murray, Jim Palmer, Cal Ripken, Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, and Earl Weaver. That's an excellent list.
yeah.
That's an excellent list. And no St. Louis Browns, obviously, in that list, which is kind of interesting. The Padres have 3, which is pretty impressive, right, considering they've never won a World Series.
Right, but I mean, winning World Series isn't really anything to having Hall of Famers.
Well, you got a Hall of Fame closer in there for the Padres, and they didn't win a World Series, so that's kind of interesting to me a little bit.
Yeah.
Winfield went as a Padre, even though he won his World Series with the Blue Jays and the Twins. Actually, he won 2 World Series.
And I don't think they have any coming up unless, I don't know, maybe Fernando Tatis Jr. makes it one day. That's where they're
That's a
looking.
long way from
Right.
it, but you know how much I like that player.
Oh, yeah.
What a season he had last year. The Phillies been around a really long time. They only have 6 Hall of Famers.
Well, we talked about in their deep dive, there's a long period of not good times for the Phillies, so it's not too surprising.
And great names, and Richie Ashburn, Jim Bunning, Steve Carlton, Chuck Klein, Robin Roberts, and Mike Schmidt. I mean, those are iconic
Well, it's Carlton
guys.
and Schmidt. You can see that you had Ashburn, Bunning, Carlton, and Schmidt all getting elected very close together. It kind of tells you that you had that group come up in the 70s and 80s, which changed that franchise around.
And Bunning actually threw no hitter in both leagues. Perfect game against the Mets on Father's Day in 1964. He won more games for the Tigers, but he went in as a Philly, and everybody kind of feels that's right. And Grover Cleveland Alexander didn't have caps, so
Right.
he would be a Philly as well. Would Kurt Schilling? He'll never get in.
No,
but-
he'll never get in.
He'll never get in. Okay, we just won't even talk about that. The Pirates have 4, 8, 10 guys in there. And great names including Roberto Clemente, Ralph Kiner, Bill Mazeroski. You can talk about. You think that's a great name? Willie Stargell, Pied Trainer, and Lloyd and Paul Waiter.
We've talked about.
We talked about them ad infinitum. McCutcheon just signed up with the Pirates for another season.
But he's not going to get in the Hall of Fame.
I don't think so. But another guy who's had an excellent career, and I was thinking, okay, so he's going to play another year. Are there any career stats that he can achieve by playing? He can get 300 home runs. That's the only one.
He doesn't have a chance at the Hall of Fame.
No, I don't think. And what surprised me about Kutch, and I love the player, was his defensive rating was much lower than I somehow thought this guy was a really good defender.
No, he was never an amazing defender.
I really thought he was. The Rangers, Ivan Rodriguez,
just went into Nolan Ryan. But
Nolan Ryan had a choice. He could have gone a lot of places.
Go in. The question is, will Beltre go in as a Ranger?
Yes, I think
and
so.
If he does that, he's the next guy to go in as a Ranger, yes. And then I don't know who's going in.
They mentioned Michael Young's name, and come on, be serious.
The Rays, as we said, they do not have anybody going in.
Right, and the Red Sox have, I think, 12 or 13, and mainly because they've been around a long time, and some, great names too, just like the others with Jimmy Fox, and which is kind of in the Jimmy Fox. I thought of him, I didn't realize that he had that much time because he played for the A's as well.
I always thought of him as an A.
Yeah, and he went in as a Red Sox. Boggs.
Clemens goes in as a Red Sox if he gets in.
Yeah, I do.
He wouldn't go in as a Yankee or a Blue Jay.
Or an Astro.
No,
I don't think so either. But again, he's in the same purgatory that everybody else is. But I think he'd be a Red Sox. The Reds, Sparky, Johnny Bench, Barry Larkin, Ernie Lombardi, the Schnoz, Bill McKechnie, Joe Morgan, Tony Perez, Eppa Rixey, the pitcher we talked about last time, and Ed Rush. That's a nice list. Pete Rose is not going to the Hall of Fame. What about Joey Votto?
Hopefully, because I can't think of who's going in for the Reds if not him.
I think Joey Votto is your pick right now. And if you don't get him in there, the Rockies have Larry Walker, and they hope
Todd Helton.
They hope Todd Helton will get.
He should be in this year.
Even this year, I think he's going to be one of the guys.
He's going to be one of the guys that gets in this year.
The Royals only had one, which really surprised me.
Which is George Brett.
Well, that doesn't surprise me, but that there weren't any others is what surprises me.
And it could be Beltran, but I think Beltran's more likely to go in as a Met. And we've talked about this guy's Hall of Fame candidacy before in Salvador Perez. If he makes it, he obviously goes in as a Royal.
I agree with that, but I think the hard thing for him is he's going to have to put up a few more, like 25, 30 home run seasons.
Do like another 2 or 3.
Yeah, and that's really hard to do that. The old Washington Senators had Walter Johnson, obviously, Bucky Harris, the manager, Sam Rice, great player, and Goose Goslin went in as a Senator. He played for multiple teams. We mentioned the Spiders. The Tigers have great names, right? Ty Cobb. And Ty Cobb did not play his entire career for the Tigers.
Yeah,
he
but
actually went someplace, but he played,
right. But there was no.
I just always thought of him as a Tiger and a Tiger only,
okay.
And he did not. Mickey Cochran, catcher on the 35 team. Sam Crawford, Hank Greenberg, Harry Heilman, great player you should know more about. Huey Jennings, a manager. Al Kaline, George Kell, Heine Manouche. Jack Morris, Hal Newhouser, the 2-time MVP winner at pitcher, the only guy that has won consecutive MVPs as a pitcher, and Alan Trammell. And so Charlie Gehringer, we talked about, didn't have a cap, and Lou Whitaker has gotten screwed.
And Miguel Cabrera will go in as a Tiger.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think Verlander will go in as a Tiger, like we said before as well. The Twins, who were the old Washington Senators, so that would be sort of connected to Walter Johnson and whatnot. Blyleven Carew, Jim Cott, Harmon Killebrew, Tony Oliva, Kirby Puckett. That's a great list.
Yeah, a lot of all-time players there.
The White Sox have 8. The 2 shortstops, Aparicio and Appling. Harold Baines, which people like to get on. Red Faber, Ted Lyons, the pitcher, Minnie Mignoso, and Frank Thomas. Anybody else in your mind for them? Like, what do you think? And he's on the ballot this year.
With Burley?
Yeah. There's a lot of support for Burley.
Right, more than I would think, but he's such a good fielder that I guess I'm probably undervaluing that.
And so the Yankees have I said 22, and because we're Met fans, we are not going to mention the Yankee players in the Hall of Fame. This is just, if you want them, you can go look it up.
A-Rod would probably go in as a Yankee if he gets in.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think he's going to make it.
I don't think he'll make it, but if he'd go in as a Yankee.
So, those are all the teams and all their players, and I think it's just more important to us fans because you want to have the player as your own. like by having him wear your team's cap. I'm a fan of this team,
Right.
but the players, they're not making that decision. It's where were they treated the best? Where do they feel like they had the love?
And where do they feel like that and it's supposed to be where do they have their biggest part of their career and where do they identify with? And to me, it's also like if I had to conjure up an image of a player in my head, their Hall of Fame plaque should match that. So it would be weird if we saw Mike Piazza in a San Diego Padre uniform.
Well, yeah. It would be even weirder if it was a Florida Marlin, by the way, for whom he only played 5 games. Do you want to just quickly, so Abreu's a Philly.
Yeah.
Batista.
Blue Jay.
Yep. Beltran, we talked about. Beltre, Burley. Colon, I have no idea.
Cap.
No cap. Adrian Gonzalez.
Padre.
Torrey Hunter.
Twin, probably.
Over Angels, right? Andrew Jones, I think that's obvious. Victor Martinez.
No cap, maybe a Tiger.
Yeah. He was probably their greatest designated hitter. We'll talk about in our Tiger Deep 5.
Yeah.
Mauer, obviously. Pettit is a tough one, although it's got to be Yankees.
It's Yankees.
Yeah. Brandon Phillips. Well, he doesn't even really have a chance.
No,
But he'd be a red if he were to go
red.
in. We mentioned Jose Reyes. We mentioned Ramirez, but we mentioned Jose. He would be a Met. Francisco K-Rod. Well, he's not getting in, but I guess it was Angels. Yeah, that I would think. Rollins is a Philly. James Shields. How did he get on this list?
He played the season. He played the requisite number of years.
Big game James, right?
Maybe a Padre or a Ray.
I would say Rays.
Yeah.
With that. Utley's a Philly. Vizquel. That's a tough one, and everybody talks about Vizquel
Probably
all the
a
time.
Guardian, though, because what else would he go in as?
A Mariner?
No.
Yeah, he played there for a while, didn't he? How long did he play for the Mariners?
God, I can't imagine it was anything close to resembling what he put in for the Guardians.
Yeah, and where else did he play? He played for. He had, I think, 3 stints where he was a significant player. The Giants was another team he played for. That was the other team.
He played 11 years in Cleveland, 5 years in Seattle, 4 in San Francisco.
Okay, so it's Cleveland.
It's
right,
Cleveland.
At least I got the second one right over that. And last, Billy Wagner, pretty obvious. Astro. Right. And I'm hoping he gets in. I feel like he's unfairly maligned for only pitching 900 innings. So there you go, Chris. There you go, everybody. Thanks for, we're getting all kinds of people
we always
writing into us.
appreciate-
And what we're getting now is people going, you made a mistake at, 10 minutes.
Please don't keep on us like that.
Keep doing that because it really bothers me.
Drives us to be better.
Oh, man, I got to do a better job, and you guys are making us be better. So thank you. Thanks for listening. Merry Christmas, because we will drop our next podcast on Tuesday, the 26th, not on Monday, Christmas Day. But I think we're going to crank through 2 next week, even at this off season.
Happy holidays to everybody, and have a great holiday season.